Welcome to the DeFi Standard. This is Patty XRP, and today we are going to go through the new white paper release from the Panther Protocol. And Panther is going to be a privacy preserving protocol for digital assets, especially targeting the decentralized finance space. And a couple disclaimers before we get in. This is not financial advice. It's meant to educate you guys about the Panther protocol. And additionally, I am interested in purchasing the governance token for Panther, which will be called the Panther Token with ticker symbol zkP. This public sale is going to happen sometime in Q3 of this year. So, in between July through the end of September, we should expect them to do their proof of concept launch on the Ethereum blockchain, coupled with a public sale of the governance token Panther, which will have a 1 billion max token supply. And we'll get into the tokenomics a little later, but just wanted to get that out of the way so you guys know where I am going to be coming from. So, from the white paper, the team states that Panther is a decentralized privacy meta protocol enabling confidential, trusted transactions and interoperability with DeFi. Their five main goals will be to provide a secure private transaction ecosystem with a superior user experience. They are hoping to maintain composability with DeFi protocols, ensure privacy backed by a game theoretic model, establish verifiable trust relationships between participants, and then develop a novel price discovery mechanism for privacy. And going back to the game theoretic model, so they have a actually really well-renowned game theorist that I cannot pronounce his name for the life of me, so I will not attempt. However, you can look into him more as he's listed under an advisor for the project on their website, which is pantherprotocol.io. Panther Protocol is going to be a multi-chain project. Like we said, first launching on Ethereum and then eventually adding additional what they call peer chains. So that could be anything from Flare, Avalanche, Polkadot, um, Solana, all the different DeFi platforms out there that are not natively private. In fact, the majority of, decentralized permissionless ledgers out there are going to have all transactions be public. And this means that if somebody is able to get some third party metadata that links identifying information with one of your crypto addresses or transactions, then they can basically find an audit trail of what you have been doing on said public blockchain. And this could be used for identity theft purposes, censorship, or any other plethora of things of having your identity unmasked. So with Panther, they state that there are other privacy native cryptocurrencies out there, and you guys will know a few like Zcash and Monero. Additionally, there's a couple other privacy protocols that are trying to solve similar problems that Panther is going to. However, some of the issues here are, these privacy native cryptos are not currently composable with many DeFi ecosystems, which limits their utility. And then additionally, they were not made with regulatory compliance in mind, which will encourage institutional investors and businesses from playing around, experimenting with these privacy protocols, which presents issues in bootstrapping any kind of network up and getting enough volume in there and value to have liquidity and allow the protocol to function in the way that it is meant to. So Panther Protocol is really trying to tackle privacy, but also in a regulatory compliant way. Some of their key differentiators and features listed are going to be the enabling of trusted transactions and regulatory compliance whilst preserving privacy. They're going to have privacy mining and a price discovery mechanism, DeFi composability, and interoperability between multiple blockchains. So, this interoperability is really interesting to me as they're going to have something called an interchain DEX. And this is going to allow you to privately swap assets from one blockchain to another blockchain. And this is going to be built in at the layer one level. So that's something I'm really interested in seeing come to fruition. It's a little farther down in their roadmap, but being able to swap from, let's say, Ethereum to Spark via their interchain DEX in a private manner, I think could be something that could be very interesting for institutional investors, even individuals that just don't want their transactions tracked from blockchain to blockchain. And you can also think about somebody that maybe makes a living off trading DeFi or investing in DeFi, and they may have certain strategies that they wish to not become public or easily tracked, at least across all the different transactions that are taking place. So this could also help prevent the stealing of strategies in that regard, whether it be for individuals or some kind of investment fund that may be getting into the DeFi space. Now I'm going to introduce a little background around the Panther Protocol team's take on privacy by reading off a few quotes from their white paper. The first is they state that the privacy landscape is inextricably linked with the evolution of technology. So on this front, we can think like, before the internet, largely nobody really could track what you were doing, where you were going, how you were making transactions. I mean, the only way is if you, you had a time machine and can kind of follow somebody around or go back in time to see what they did with all their life. Now with the advent of social media and things like that, um, and the internet, really, people are learning stuff that they put out there is very permanent. And, while this can be good or bad in different cases, it's definitely something we need to address in the future, especially when it comes to people's finances and assets that are stored on blockchains. Additionally, they say paradoxically, while blockchains take away control from institutions, their openness makes them a perfect platform for targeted monitoring as well as mass surveillance. And then additionally, blockchains are a treasure trove of data representing users' private remittances, financial holdings, NFT purchases, currency exchanges, etc. These can often be supplemented by off-chain metadata to unmask the real-world identity behind the wallet address. So, like this off-chain metadata is just something that can link your identity to your blockchain transactions. So maybe that's going through a third party exchange like Coinbase or Bitstamp or Binance. So it's relatively easy to get caught in that, and especially in the environment we live in. But Panther's looking to solve some of those issues. And on the regulatory and compliance front, Panther is looking to tackle guidance put out by the Financial Action Task Force, which is the FATF. Additionally, one of their guidelines is for anti money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism, which is AML CTF. Also, we know AML KYC, know your customer. And then additionally, looking at new FinCEN, so that's the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, new guidelines being put out by them to track cryptocurrency transactions over $3,000. So FinCEN's looking to make exchanges, special, rather centralized ones, store any user information when they do a transaction over $3,000, which, I imagine for a lot of people, they've done over $3,000 worth in transactions on, any given exchange, especially if you've been in the space for a while. And then some of the problems that the Panther team lists with current compliance measures is that they seem to employ a guilty unless proven innocent presumption. They also force users to give up personally identifiable information (PII), And, this could be every time you sign up with an exchange, you have to give them all your information. So you have to keep reproving and reproving and reproving who you are for every different, service or application that you go through, which just means that your data's in more places for it to be taken advantage of. And possibly, in the future, reducing how many different entities we need to be able to give our information to can really cut down on the ability for your info to be misused or hacked, or just stolen in some other way. And Panther is going to do this with something called zero knowledge proofs, which we will touch on later. But I do want to point out two really interesting points from the ineffectiveness that the Panther team has found with regulatory compliance around, you know, giving up your data to verify who you are. So they state a recent study by Poll that found anti money laundering policy intervention has less than 0.1% impact on criminal finances. Compliance costs exceed recovered criminal funds more than 100 times over, and banks, taxpayers, and ordinary citizens are penalized more than criminal enterprises. So that's a pretty eye popping study to me, the fact that we have, these AML policies and they're largely ineffective and it's super costly, not only to the agencies, conducting this and the businesses conducting this, but also, it forces us to give up a lot of data in order to meet these standards. And, as we can see from that study, only 0.1% impact, which is really crazy to me and, a little infuriating. And additionally, they cite a separate report from the British Banking Association, saying that the costs of financial crime compliance for the British banking industry have gone beyond a tipping point in comparison with the AML CTF benefits being accrued. So there's two different sources that have conducted studies around this, saying that the cost of implementing some of these policies, it greatly outweighs any benefits that are being seen in the real world. Panther is not looking to solve every, regulatory and privacy related issue out there, but their aim is, in quotes, to at least partially redress the compliance cost slash benefit balance by advocating for the use of privacy enhancing technology, which is PET. And they further state recent research and development into PET has allowed a party to verify, process, and make inferences from a target data set without directly accessing the underlying data. And basically, it's the manifestation of the least privilege principle. Like I was saying earlier, this happens through zero knowledge proofs. So you can think of it basically, it's a way for you to use math to verify that, some data points or criteria exist with an individual or business looking to conduct themselves in DeFi, but you actually don't need to see the um, underlying data. You're able to use math to determine the correctness and the verifiability of a user's information without seeing it, which means less eyes on your data, less, parties storing your data, which ultimately, can help lead to better privacy for individuals and institutions, or like enterprises out there that are going to conduct in the DeFi space. And they give two real world examples of where enabling privacy in transactions can be really beneficial, um, more so in an equitable way between multiple parties. So the first one is called a double auction. So you can imagine if you are a seller of an item in an auction and you know what the max bid price is going to be. So you wouldn't want to offer up your item or your product or service any lower than that max bid price, as that makes the most sense for you economically. And the same goes for buyers. If they know the lowest price at which a seller is going to sell something, then they won't place their bid any higher than that. And what happens here is all the economic benefit of the transactions are swayed to one side rather than being somewhere in the middle where both parties see an economic benefit. And, this is because um, if if you don't know what somebody is going to put down as far as a selling price or a bidding price, depending on what side you're on, then you have to basically put up what you think is the best value to get the deal done, which generally is going to be more equitable for both sides of the trade. Rather than you having some privileged information where the other party doesn't have that information about you. So that's where, auctioning without knowing, and maybe auctioning isn't the best term, even though that's how they refer to it in economics, but just doing a transaction between each other for a product or service, more equitable when both sides don't know what the other one is thinking, rather than just one side knowing and the other being in the dark. And then additionally, the other example they list is, in DeFi and on blockchain, you can think of a liquidity pool like Uniswap. And let's say you have to go through a miner to have your transaction put through and ordered correctly, or however they're going to order it for each block that's closed on Ethereum. This is termed a problem called miner extractable value, and they can perform a sandwich attack on your trade. So if they know that you are going to swap um, Ethereum for USDT, well, they can place an order before you and an order after you if they know what you're going to do. Um, Basically, arbitraging off your trade because they know which way the market's starting at and which way it's going to move to. So they can kind of front run you and then collect the arbitrage on the back end. Now, on the Flare network, this is not as easy with the speed of transactions going through and the way that the consensus works for Flare, but it is a very valid problem, and it's not just something in blockchain. If you ever heard of high frequency trading in the stock market, this follows a similar thing where basically people with higher latency on their internet connections or more direct lines to a stock exchange are able to see orders that are trying to come in via computer program and then front run those trades in a similar manner. And sure, they're not collecting a huge amount of value on any one of these sandwich attacks that they're conducting, but rather, they're basically scalping just a bunch of individuals, and over time, that adds up to a lot. Now that we have some really solid background around the problems that the Panther Protocol is trying to solve, let's get into the mechanisms behind that. So, like I was saying earlier, zero knowledge proofs, which is acronymed ZKP, is a class of method by which one party, the prover, can prove to another party, the verifier, that they know a value without revealing the value itself or any other information. Basically, the three traits of zero knowledge proofs are soundness, completeness, and zero knowledge. So, soundness states if the statement is false, the verifier will always reject. Completeness is if the statement is true, the verifier will always accept it. And then zero knowledge means the verifier learns no information except for the truth of the statement. So you can kind of think of this if you do any kind of like coding practices and stuff, it's like a Boolean. So you have some underlying criteria, the math runs it. and or like the protocol runs it, and it's puts an input or an output rather that says true or false. So that's basically in a really brief way how it's working. It's just some business logic to determine the truth or falseness of a criteria being put through. Two of the groups of zero knowledge proofs are interactive and non interactive zero knowledge proofs. So, an interactive proof requires you to keep reproving yourself to different verifiers that are going to validate that proof. So, that's costly from a time standpoint and also possibly monetarily if there's a fee attached with proving yourself or anything like that. The more times that you have to go and reprove who you are, generally, the more that you're going to have to do there. However, Panther Protocol is using the non-interactive zero-knowledge proofs, which allows the prover to generate and publish a proof that can be validated by any verifier at any time with no further interaction. So you just have to do it once, and then all the different verifiers can use that one proof. And their even greater subset that they're going to be using is called SNARK, which is succinct, non-interactive argument of knowledge. And you may have also heard of these as zkSNARKs, so zero knowledge snarks. And the traits of this, proofing or verification logic is that it must be succinct. So the size of the proof is small compared to the size of the statement being proved. They also need to be non interactive, which we were just covering there. The argument is a weaker notion of a mathematical proof where we assume the prover has bounded computational resources. So, not making this too difficult on somebody that doesn't have, infrastructure with the technical capacity to do very complex mathematical proofs. So, making sure it's open to many different people. And then also the knowledge part where the prover cannot construct a proof without knowing a certain witness for the statement. So this comes into when people are trying to verify a proof, it helps as a prover to have a witness in order to kind of have another independent party backing up what you are trying to prove. And an important add on here is snarks themselves are not inherently zero knowledge. However, in the application that Panther Protocol is putting forth, they will be zero knowledge snarks. So that will be a zkSNARK, will be the term. And it's a proof that is a multi stage process. And we'll get into that more here with a diagram. So this is kind of the mathematical process behind generating zkSNARK proofs. So they utilize a circuit of logical gates, up to thousands of them. So, that's some inputs that go in, compared, and give you an output. And then they're using quadratic arithmetic equations as well as polynomials to eventually construct this zkSNARK proof. And I'm not that in depth with math at this level to remember what all this stuff is from back in my schooling days. But here it is for anybody that is. Just, you can pause here and take a look at this further. But that's all I will touch on it at this point. And then a cool additional benefit of using zero knowledge proofs, since it does implement some layer 2 solutions, is to help with scaling blockchains by computing some transactions off chain, or on a side chain rather. And additionally, it's going to provide that privacy and anonymity by doing this. And now to run through something called mixing services, which are also known as tumblers. And these services obscure the audit trail back to a crypto asset's original source. And this can usually be achieved by breaking the link between the fund's input and output address, thereby allowing an identifiable or tainted asset to become anonymous and untainted. And basically, what they're saying with tainted there is that, somebody can figure out who you are or your identity. And this process, like using a mixing service, enables assets passing through the mixer to regain or retain their fungibility, which is a crucial characteristic of sound money. If the tokens are no longer fungible with each other, then in fact they are something new. And additionally, two main factors that affect the level of privacy offered by a mixing service are going to be the size of the anonymity set, as well as the volume of transactions in the anonymous pool prior to withdrawal, often proxied by time in the pool. So you can think here, if you enter into a mixer and there's just one other person there, well, it's a lot, you got a 50-50 chance figuring out who it is when somebody comes out on the other end. Now, if layer in like millions and millions of dollars worth of assets, maybe billions one day, then that anonymity set increases drastically in size, and it's much, much more difficult to figure out, who's leaving and entering these pools. Additionally, if you're sitting in one of these pools, the longer you do it, the harder it's going to be to determine when you left. So that's another huge parameter there. And basically, these two parameters make it harder for a third party observer to track the flow of anonymized crypto assets. And conversely, the higher the level of plausible deniability a user can claim about their transaction activities, because that's even hidden to you while it's in this mixing service. And there are three main implementation options for privacy in DeFi. Those are going to be smart contract solutions, private cross chain solutions, and private layer 2 solutions. So, with the smart contract ones, privacy is achieved by operations performed within a smart contract. The user deposits assets into a smart contract, which in turn performs operations such as mixing. So that's kind of that mixer idea that we just talked about. Additionally, for the cross chain solutions, those enable DeFi operations to be handled by a non privacy preserving layer 1 blockchain, which could be Ethereum, Flare Network, Avalanche, anything like that, on behalf of a privacy preserving chain, which would be Zcash or Monero. And then layer 2 solutions provide privacy by mixing transactions off chain before committing them on chain. And this is done through the use of something called zk rollups. This approach, as stated by the Panther team, increases transaction throughput and provides savings in transaction fees such as gas costs when operating on top of Ethereum, although it is likely to result in increased transaction latency. So while you could see reduction in fees, it may take a little longer for your transaction to process because it is happening off chain, but that does reduce the effect of a lot of transactions happening on, like, let's say Ethereum, where they have had scaling issues in the past. So let's turn it over to the white paper to go through the listed actors and components of the Panther Protocol architecture. And so we're going to have users, which is going to be, it could be retail, institutions, small to medium enterprises, corporations, whatever you want to call it. They're going to be people that own crypto assets and that are participating in the Panther ecosystem with their wallet interface. And they're going to be creating a Panther wallet that allows you to do all this functionality within the multi-chain protocol. Additionally, they list any kind of existing blockchain that the Panther protocol is going to be implemented on as a peer chain. Ethereum is going to be the first one. Like I was saying earlier, we're going to see Flare, Avalanche, Solana, possibly Binance Smart Chain. Really, any big DeFi protocol that out there is going to eventually become a peer chain, or at least is looking to be implemented on. Ethereum's going live in Q3. The second peer chain, which is unknown, will be going live in Q4. And then additional peer chains will be going live in Q1 and Q2 of 2022. And Flare has a specific partnership with the Panther Protocol that's already been announced via a press release. And As I haven't really seen much talk about what the future peer chains will be, I also haven't seen, direct partnerships with any of the other blockchains other than knowing that they're launching on Ethereum at first. So I'm kind of hopeful that maybe they'll launch on the Flare network in Q4. So that would be really interesting if we could get that and just have another project available to us. Additionally, they're going to have what they term Z assets, and Z assets are the private minted form of cryptocurrencies. You can think of it as a derivative, as the Z asset is going to be pegged 1 to 1 with whatever asset you're collateralizing it with. So imagine you want to get private transactions with your Spark token. Well, you can take Spark to one of the Panther vaults and then deposit there with a 1 to 1 backing. You'll have your Z assets minted, which will have privacy enabled, and then you're able to utilize them. And we'll kind of go through a flowchart later on how that happens. But just know any kind of privacy infused asset used through the Panther protocol are going to be deemed Z assets. So it could be ZFLR, or maybe we see ZFXRP or ZFLTC in the future. Um, and as we were talking about these Panther vaults, they're going to be autonomous, zero knowledge, self custodial smart contracts, which act as decentralized custodians for the collateral of Z assets. Additionally, we'll have groups called service providers. So those are going to be the entities that are providing the decentralized applications. Maybe they're centralized applications too, which are support private transactions of Z assets by Panther users. And so these are groupings that you may or may not have to reveal some like know your customer or AML information to them to interact with them. Like let's say on the case of Flare, if we're going to have Flare Finance and Trustline implement KYC, this could be a good way to selectively reveal your information to only those protocols if it's required. And I'm kind of just, spitballing a little there. I don't know exactly how it will work, but that's just something, thinking about it, how I could see it going down. Additionally, we're going to have these groups called trust providers, and they're going to be the entities which provide verifiable statements or attestations about users, which allow these service providers to increase their level of trust in those users. So earlier we were talking about with the zkSNARKs, how you would have like a witness. That's what these trust providers are going to operate as. And so this will kind of minimize the amount of groups that you need to give information up when you have a trust provider acting as a witness. And some of the groups that could be that, it could be a regulatory agency, it could be like a notary if you had to get something signed. So a bunch of different groups could act as trust providers. And by the nature of it being a decentralized protocol, really anybody can do it. But, if you work in compliance and regulation, it seems more up those parties' alley to get involved there. Additionally, we're going to see something called Panther pools, which will be a collection of asset pools. Each pool allows users to privately deposit, withdraw, and transact on any peer chain through the use of one or more Z assets. You can think of this as like private liquidity pools in order to transact through different types of assets and swap in and out of them. We're also going to have privacy miners, which are participants in the Panther ecosystem, which frequently contribute Z asset transactions to the anonymity set and earn Panther tokens as a reward. So that could be like a liquidity provider. And then the Panther protocol will eventually have a DAO. It's a slow rollout, and I don't think that's going to be live until 2022. But as we know, a DAO is just a decentralized autonomous organization. Those are going to be implemented on Trustline and Flare Finance as well. And the last part or last party here is going to be the relayers, and that's a network of proxy nodes for relaying transactions onto peer chains in a privacy preserving manner. So this is how, your Z assets, those privacy infused assets, will be able to interact with DeFi applications on top of any of the peer chains that Panther Protocol integrates with. All right, so let's see if I can break down this lovely flowchart from the Panther team on their full architecture. But basically, you can see we have these relayers set up right here. Um, and they're going to allow privacy miners and users to basically either provide liquidity or conduct Z asset transfers. And if you're going to conduct a transfer, this will go over to the layer one component, which is listed initially as a side chain, but eventually is going to become an interchain DEX that is private for anybody to use. And this will allow you to put it through the pool with your privacy infused Z asset and swap for other assets that you'd like to use. Also, these privacy miners, they're able to lock their assets in the Panther vault to supply liquidity to these Panther pools in the form of Z assets. So that's another cool thing, an opportunity for yield and to earn the Panther token if that's something you're so inclined to do in the future. And then moving down here, we can see how users are able to do like selective KYC, AML, or verification. So this top part is just like pure private Z asset transfers through a relayer. But in the case that you need to prove yourself to operate within some kind of application, the user is able to provide attestations and submit personal data to these service and trust providers. So the trust provider will verify any of your personal data, submit it as a attestation to the Panther registry, which you can then use later to provide to these service providers that, hey, look, I've had one of the trust providers within the ecosystem verify this information. It'll go through the math that's conducted on it, and the service provider can know without actually seeing your information that you are a trusted or verified individual that is allowed to operate within a certain application. Um, and additionally, you can see trusted transactions with users from these service providers can go to a service contract with on-chain verification via the module for called Panther verification. And then additionally, they'll have decentralized storage for attestations, provided by the trust providers. So you can see this pretty complex setup with a lot of different parts. So, this is something I'm still absorbing. I was trying to record this video last night and I was like, it's pretty heavy. The words just aren't coming out right. So I'm hoping this time has sounded a lot better to me. But you can see a lot going on. But like the main takeaway is that you can minimize how many parties are getting your personal data via these trust providers, and then they can use mathematical proofs in order to give any entity that you're interacting with the verification they need to know that you are able, based on their criteria, to operate within the system. So, here's a really easy example. Like, let's say if you have your driver's license, with one of these trust providers and a guy that works at a liquor store, utilizes the Panther protocol or, zero knowledge proofs rather, they could see that, hey, you're 21 or older to buy some beer rather, without having to actually see your ID. So, that could be some like a use case in the future if we see these digitized government issued IDs. So I think that's like an interesting use case. There's many more on top of it. I'm sure just any time that you want to prove you're a U.S. citizen with like a social security ID, you'd prefer not to give out that social security number and rather have it just with one trust provider or maybe a couple, and they can just provide that mathematical zero knowledge proof to whatever service needs to know that you have a social security number. So that's a big one because especially since social security numbers, they can be used to steal people's identities. So it's, one of the things that I'm most cautious about giving out. Just kind of got that from my parents growing up. But yeah, I think that tackles that. So what they're trying to do here is minimize as far as possible the anonymity set of a transaction. Oh yeah, so they're trying to, make sure these things don't happen. They don't want the tracing back to the origin of a transaction. following the onward journey of a transaction and don't want people to be able to determine general transaction patterns like volume, frequency, and reuse of addresses. So the design goals for the Panther protocol and why they designed it in the way that we went through above is for transaction unlinkability, unobservability, and all participants are economically incentivized to behave honestly. So that's that game theory model behind it. Additionally, with the design, their principles were to be permissionless, allowing open participation, security and privacy by default, minimize trust assumptions, voluntary disclosures of private data. So that's like that selective KYC AML that I was talking about. And then it's going to have a modular design for providing clean interfaces. So they want it to be easy to use. I think that's a really big thing in DeFi is like, you got to make these things where your average Joe out there that's not like sinking all their time into it, like can at least, figure out how to click buttons around and do the actions they need to take. Additionally, they want easy integration with third party services and an upgradable protocol without having to unshield already minted Z assets. So that's being able to basically make updates on the underlying architecture and code of the Panther protocol design without having to revert back or, give away any information about people's Z assets, the addresses they came from, possibly who they belong to. So that's really big that they're going to be able to upgrade this protocol without, um, you know, compromising any of the goals. Another nice feature is going to be the ability for Panther to allow users to voluntarily, that's a really key word, generate and share disclosure statements with whichever third parties they choose in order to prove details of their interactions with Panther Protocol and other statements about themselves, which may be required in order to interact with counterparties. And then moving on down here, they state that trust providers are typically going to be publicly visible and reputable organizations. But like I said earlier, as it's a permissionless network, anybody could be a trust provider. It just kind of makes more sense for people specializing in KYC or authorities that issue certificates or some kind of notary are working as these trust providers, as generally in the real world that's what they do. They provide trust to people. They'll be the main ones operating as the trust providers here. And then let's touch on some example use cases with the trust providers. So the trust provider could perform KYC for a Panther user and provide them with a digitally signed statement attesting to any of the following things. And that's going to be like, your passport photo is valid, you're a citizen of some country, your birth date, or your age. Additionally, trust provider verifies driver's license provided by Panther users and gives them, attestations about that they're licensed to drive a certain vehicle, or that they don't have like traffic violations or anything like that. Additionally, it could be used as a manager of a security token sale. They could receive sign attestations showing that a trust provider certifies that an applicant to the sale is over 18 and a citizen of a selected list of approved countries. Additionally, under collateralized DeFi lending protocols, need to check that a borrower has a minimum credit score before privately lending Z assets to them without requiring collateral to safeguard the loan. So you could involve credit in this without revealing all your credit information to the service provider. They could just say, oh, this person needs to have a credit score of 700 or higher. And it'll go through, the zero knowledge proof verification process. And if you had a score of 650, it would return false to the service provider, and then they would deny you the loan because you fall below their criteria. But the output to them is false. They don't see what your actual score is. So those are some examples that will hopefully, jog the mind about how this can be used in the future. And moving forward, let's take a look at the Panther Protocol roadmap. And so we just finished up Q2, which involved their GitHub being published. Their first two private sales were closed. The team has been expanded upon. It's like 20 plus people at this point. And a reminder on the team from the last video we did, which I will put as one of the end cards at the end of this video if you haven't seen it and want to go back. It's more centered on the team and their philosophy. But basically, the CEO is a man by the name of Oliver Gale, who is the creator of the firm that made the first CBDC, which is from the Bahamas and called the Sand Dollar. Additionally, these Panther Protocol, if there's any CBDCs issued on a public ledger, then it will be, if the Panther Protocol is integrated with that public ledger, then you will be able to infuse CBDCs with privacy when interacting on, something like the Flare blockchain or the Ethereum blockchain, if for whatever reason CBDCs get issued onto there. Additionally, they just released their public white paper, which is what we're covering now. So going forward over the next year, we are going to see them have a beta, which will include transactional privacy and disclosure. So they'll have a version 2 of their light paper, the proof of concept for the Panther layer 1 and 2. And then you'll be able to mint and burn Z assets, mix Z assets. Privacy relayers will be implemented. The zkP token, called Panther Token, will be listed on Ethereum. No word on an exact date yet, but that will be within the next couple of months. And I'll definitely keep you guys updated once I get information with this. I'm in their Telegram group, and they have an announcements channel too. So hopefully we'll get some information in at least a week's time, heads up, to be able to look into possibly buying that public sale when it goes live. Additionally, Ethereum is going to be the first peer chain it's launched on, and they will have the initial setup of the DAO. And then moving into Q4, they'll have the trust provider technology implemented, voluntary disclosure of statements, service provider technology will be implemented, and zero knowledge proofs. And then they will implement quadratic voting via the DAO, and the second peer chain will be launched. Really interesting about this quadratic voting. So basically, it states that people can pay extra in order to vote on things that they really care about. But however, every time you want to add another vote, you have to exponentially increase by the additional number of votes you're adding. So the first vote would cost you 1 Panther token. And then from there, it starts increasing rapidly if you want to apply more votes to that one specific proposal. Not the easiest example to follow, but if you look up quadratic voting on Google and go to Wikipedia, nice little description that makes it pretty easy to understand. So it's slightly different than the liquid democracy on Flare Network, but it's also similar, as the token holders of their native asset, the Panther token, are going to be able to participate in governance. And then in Q1 of next year, we'll have the DAO fully set up. The first service providers will launch, the first trust providers will launch, and then we're going to see the interchain private DEXs created, as well as privacy price discovery enacted. And then finally, in Q2 of 2022, they will finish out this prolonged rollout with the addition of more peer chains, the DEX privacy integration, interchain functionality, and then they'll also have anonymous liquidity providers and privacy mining at that point. So, this isn't something that's going to all be out there at once. They're doing a slow rollout and kind of getting the proof of concept out there and seeing what kind of interest is in the network as they continually roll out the full functionality. And let's go through an example of a private swap transaction from Z USDT to Z DAI. via Uniswap. So basically, the user, so their amount of ZUSD to be swapped is withdrawn from the Panther ZUSDT mixer on the sidechain. Then that ZUSDT is bridged over to layer one of the Ethereum blockchain as USDT. The USDT is swapped for DAI on Uniswap. And then the DAI is bridged back over to the side chain as Z DAI, and the Z DAI is deposited into the Panther Z DAI mixer. And finally, the user obtains the deposit note for Z DAI. And if you want to go over here further, they have a nice little flow chart of how this is going to work. So the user will be on the side chain, which is like the layer 2 smart contracts. Basically, they'll send their ZUSDT. They'll say they want to swap it for ZDAI, and it'll go through a mixer and agent system, and then it will bridge that asset on to the Ethereum layer 1 smart contracts, which will transfer USDT to the agent on Ethereum, conduct the swap between USDT and DAI, and then it will start sending it back out through the same process to the bridge. The bridge will send that over to the layer 2 sidechain that's being implemented, and it will mint ZDAI on the sidechain and then put it into the mixer and let the user know that it has been delivered. So, definitely a big process, but these are the kind of things that they have to go through to get this implemented in the beginning, and enable people to transact privately. And an important note on disclosure of your information is that on Panther, all disclosures are private, secure, and voluntary. Basically, the outcome or consequences of a user choosing not to disclose are simply that the counterparty or like that service provider could refuse any further interactions with you if they need you to prove who you are and you're not willing to do that. Panther is going to facilitate voluntary disclosure, and in the future, you will have the ability to voluntarily disclose the full content of selected attestations from trust providers. And then there will be more support for selective fine grains disclosure, which still discloses confidential, unencrypted data to the requesting counterparty, but reduces the data shared to minimal levels. And then finally, Panther will allow zero knowledge proofs of signed statements from trust providers and verification of such proofs, both off chain and as part of on chain transactions, which will share no private information to the requesting party or a smart contract beyond the absolute minimum which needs to be shared. And as an example here, let's see, a user could prove that a trust provider has certified they are at least 18 years old without disclosing their date of birth or any other personal information. They envisage that zero knowledge proof would be most compelling for attestations of personal, private, or sensitive statements, such as those about the user's age, wealth, or medical conditions. And finally, what you guys have all been waiting for, the tokenomics of the Panther token. So it's a finite supply, privacy preserving governance token that represents a right to vote on governance proposals on the Panther Protocol. The supply is limited to 1 billion zkP. It's going to be used to reward privacy miners for providing Z assets to the Panther pool, which can be viewed as a specialized form of liquidity mining. Also, zkP is used to pay relayer fees for new private Ethereum addresses. And this is something I didn't touch on as much, but in order to facilitate this movement from layer 2 to layer 1 on Ethereum or possibly other blockchains, I'll have to see how much any implementations change between the different consensus styles of the blockchains that Panther launches on. But basically it uses these private addresses when you go from being a Z asset on the side chain to Ethereum. It'll create a new private address for you. So, to help ensure that privacy is maintained while you're moving into the Ethereum like public ecosystem where the transaction will be visible. So these like one-time use private addresses to go in and out for a swap. Make sure you don't have to use any addresses that may be known currently that you are, so you can get a new one that enables that whole like private swapping. Um, and so basically, like we were saying earlier, zkP is going to be available on Uniswap as they're listing here. We'll have to see about other exchanges or if it's solely on Uniswap, and it'll allow you to pay relayer node fees, compensate privacy miners, fund the Panther DAO and future Panther improvement proposals. With a portion of transaction fees at a rate set by the Panther token holders. And additionally, it will compensate trust providers for providing attestations about users. And then moving down here to the distribution of the supply. So 20% of the total supply is issued to the founders, team, and advisors with an unlocking period of 3 years. So gradually, those tokens will become unlocked for those individuals to sell if they so choose. Additionally, 20% of the total supply will be sold by Stellium, which is one of the firms they contracted to help with building this. And they're going to sell that to the public over the course of 1 year. So that's going to be 200 million Panther tokens. Then 10% of the total supply will be sold by Stellium to private strategic investors with a gradual unlocking of over 3 years. So I imagine this is the private sale they've already done of about 100 million tokens. And then 400 million or 40% of the total supply is going to be reserved for staking rewards and emitted using an exponential decay issuance curve over 10 years to incentivize early adopters and stakers on Panther Protocol. So with this supply distribution, they're doing the exact same thing that Flare Network and Flare Finance are doing with their main tokens. And that's that if you think about this as a graph, you have the highest rewards happening in the beginning, and then over time, they gradually decrease to where it's almost approaching zero, but never actually hitting zero. And then additionally, when the interchain DEX is implemented, the zkP token can be used for paying various fees on the DEX. So there's opportunity to earn yield here, as well as token appreciation. So the way I kind of, look at how all this is working together is that, all the fees and the distribution of the Panther token is going to be given to people that are participating in the network, which is something I like, that incentive mechanism design that is driving people to, act honestly and rationally by providing them with, the reward incentives to do so. As these liquidity pools that they're going to have and the Panther vaults and all of that increases in value, well, that just means more fees are going to be paid in zkP, and maybe that will lead to an increase in the token price in the long run as it's being used more and more people have to hold it in order to take actions through the Panther protocol. So we'll see how much of this is going to be retail versus, corporation institutional driven. I think that'll be really interesting to see if they're going to have any partners coming out, like funds or anything that want to utilize this for the DeFi space. So we'll have to keep an eye on it and keep everybody updated. But I'm sure we'll have a mix of retail users that like their privacy and want to engage here, as well as institutions that have to be looking out for, regulations around not disclosing information about their clients when they're moving around on public blockchains. So this really gives them an opportunity to infuse their transactions and interactions with privacy in order to remain compliant with regulations. And also I imagine their clients just don't want to be public, especially if you have a lot of money and them going through some party to conduct this stuff for you. I think that can be really powerful. But yeah, I know this was a really long one. I had no idea how long it was going to go, but I just kind of wanted to go through everything about this white paper and, give you guys a pretty solid substitute for reading it if that's just not your cup of tea. It's like 40 pages long, so it's a pretty lengthy white paper. I'll link a bunch of information about Panther Protocol as well as this white paper in the description of this video, and that's going to wrap it up. So just remember, this is the DeFi standard. I'm Patty XRP, and I am out.